What's up guys, my name is Michael Harris and welcome to my photography channel. I have returned this week with yet another photo critiquing session. Apparently a lot of you guys have been really enjoying these critiques, and I've been getting a lot of emails from people asking me to review their images and let them know my thoughts on their stuff. So once again, thank you so much to all the photographers that have sent me their photographs. And without further ado, let's read this person's email. I've just started doing photography at my church, and I use the Canon Rebel T7 with the basic 18 to 55mm kit lens. I hope you get to react to these photos and help me with some tips and tricks. I hope you can give me some advice to loosen up and know where to place myself when it comes to taking photographs up close, as well as what's a good setting to edit all of my photos the same so they don't look different. So now we know what kind of camera and lens that they are working with, and also what kind of help that they need that we can try to give advice on. Alright, let's look at their first image. So our first image appears to be a really tight shot or a close-up of a woman praying. So the first compliment that I would like to give to this photograph is that I like that the subject is not framed directly in the middle. If you have seen my last critique video, you know that I was really driving the point of using the compositional concept of the rule of thirds. The idea that you want to have your main subject either off to the left side of the frame or to the right side of the frame. So in terms of the placement of the subject in the picture, I actually do approve. Now for the critiquing portion of this photograph, I think that this photo might be a tad bit too close, because the photograph is just a tight shot of somebody praying, but it just looks as if somebody is just standing there with their eyes closed in church. I do see the detail of the veil that the woman is wearing, but with her eyes just closed, it doesn't really help me to actually know for a fact what this woman is doing. I had to actually guess that she was actually praying. But looking deeper into this photograph, I actually see that if you look at the bottom left, you'll notice that her fingers are actually coming out from the bottom of the frame. Alright, so now that we know that this lady was actually praying and praying with her arms like this, I would have then preferred to have seen the entire shot from the waist up. So that way you can actually incorporate the hands in the image and actually give more of a context as to what's happening in the photograph. So again, this image is actually not a bad photograph, but as a close-up, it's not as interesting as how the image would be if it was actually taken from the waist up. If you look at this sample photograph right here, I did pretty much the exact same tip that I gave you before, where instead of photographing all up close, I took a step back and framed him in a way where I was able to incorporate his hands and show people that he was actually worshiping. If I were to do a close-up on somebody, it would have to be, say for instance, if there was a special design on the person's mask, like maybe the church's logo, or maybe if there was a tear in the subject's eye. Those would be small things that I would actually consider getting a super tight close-up of. But once again, if you look back at the original photograph, since her eyes are closed, there's not really much in this image to make it look as interesting as opposed to what it looks like when you take a step back. Alright, so photograph number 2 shows a drummer playing. So the first thing that I want to compliment about this photograph is that the subject was able to freeze the drummer pretty well, especially considering that she was using a kit lens. Now for those of you who are new to photography, kit lenses are not very ideal for action photos. For action photos, you want to invest in high quality professional lenses, such as 2.8 zoom lenses or prime lenses, mainly because those lenses provide more light into your camera, thus making it easier to get more light to be able to shoot action shots. So actually one of the first things I would recommend you getting first as a lens would be a 50mm 1.8 lens. Now the first thing that I want to critique in this photograph would be that there's a little bit too much dead space on the top left of this image. And one way that we can actually bypass this, if we were photographing in the same angle, would be just to take a knee and photograph the subject at eye level. So that way your photograph won't look like a snapshot and would look like actually somebody put some thought into making this photograph. When you get into someone's eye level, you actually would get rid of that dead space in the corner, because then the symbols would take place of that dead space, and his arm that's raised up like this, from the hand to the drumstick, all of that would take over that space. Another thing that I want to critique too is that the left side of his arm is cropped out in the image. We want to make sure that for our musicians that the entire, at least upper portion of their body is in the frame. There are times where you can crop off the body, but that's normally if there's other elements in the photograph that make up for it. In this photograph, since it's just the drummer playing, especially with a blank background, there's not really any other element in the photograph that justifies the left arm being cropped out. So the third photo that we're looking at appears to be a guy playing the piano, and the first thing that I want to compliment is just how close this person was to the musician. Whenever I photograph musicians, I try my best to be as close to them as possible. especially because if you photograph them from a lower angle, especially with the wide lens, it could help make them look larger than life. And I'll share an example photo of what I'm talking about in a second, but first I want to give a critique for this photograph, and the critique would be that if you look at the top of his head is all chopped off. And again, like how I said in the last photograph, we don't want to chop off anyone's body parts. Since we are basically taking portraits of these people, we want to make sure that we make them look as good as possible. And you know how I was saying for the drummer photograph to try to be eye level with them? Well, sometimes rules can be broken, and instead of photographing at eye level, sometimes you could actually go lower. In this sample photograph right here, I got extremely close to the keyboard player and used pretty much the entirety of the keyboard as my foreground. And since I was able to photograph at a lower angle, like I mentioned previously, I was able to make the keyboard player look a lot bigger than what he actually was. And one reason that I want to photograph a little bit lower for the majority of my shots, or sometimes even at eye level, would be because if you see in the back, you'll see the person's MacBook laptop. So what would have happened if I actually was standing up higher than the piano player aiming down? Well, for one, I probably would have seen the carpet that he was playing on, and nobody wants to see that. And also, I probably would have seen more of the MacBook laptop in the back, which could be distracting. So sometimes you want to get either eye level or even lower to help hide these distractions. So looking at the original photograph, let's not chop off their heads on top and try to get even more closer than what you were before, and see what you can get if you can go low on the keyboard, filling the frame with the entirety of the keyboard, and try to have the piano player dominate more of the frame because of that. So this next photograph is of a praise singer, and right away I do like how the photographer used the singers in the background to lead all the way up to the main subject. There are two things that I want to critique about this image, and the first would be that the singer's elbow is cropped off. Again, all of these problems could be solved by just taking a quick step back. The second critique would be that I think it's kind of awkward that the woman's hand on the very far left is just randomly placed in the image. Now, for those of you who know my work, you know that I really do appreciate foregrounds, especially when it's people that are used for the foreground. So in this case, I like the idea of the hand being in there. I just think that there could be a minor tweak to try to execute this a lot better. Here is a sample photograph. While it doesn't actually show a hand, it still drives the same point across. So for instance, we have the main subject in the middle with another singer next to her leading toward the main subject. But if you look at the bushes that are next to the singer, there's actually more of them off to the side, being a much more effective foreground that allows you to look beyond that and see our main subject in the middle. So I think that maybe if you just took another step to the left and got more of the body of the praise singer that was singing next to them, and then photographing through them so we can see the main subject, I think that could be visually more interesting than just having a portion of their hand randomly in the corner of the frame. So the image is actually not bad, just make sure you don't crop off the elbow, and try to get more of the person next to them to use as a foreground. So the next photo that we have here appears to be another singer, and the first thing that I want to mention in this photograph is that when you look at her left hand, what do you see? You see that her fingertips are cropped off in the image. And this is a result of the photographer placing the subject right square in the middle. If you look back at the previous photo that I mentioned, I complimented that the subject was actually off to the right side of the image. The photographer should have done the exact same concept with this photograph, except they should have placed the subject to the left side of the frame. Because if they were actually closer to the left side, there would have been much more space for the left arm to extend and actually not have their fingertips cropped off in the frame. Another thing that I want to critique too is that the background is very blank. It's pretty much just a white wall, and make the photograph look a lot more interesting would be just to step on the side of the singer. Now if you look at this sample photograph here, you will see that I photographed the singer just simply off to the side. And because I did that, I allowed there to be a lot more depth to the image using the praise singer in the background. It's shots like this that just boils down to perspective. You don't always have to photograph the singer head on. Just taking a few steps to the right or to the left and photographing them from the side could actually make all the difference in the world. Just try to play with every single angle that you can think of when you're photographing one particular subject. Alright, and that's the final image. Now for your question in regards to editing, on how to make all your photographs look very similar while editing, the first thing that I could suggest is to make sure that the white balance looks the same for all the photographs. Yes, you can photograph your images using auto white balance, but whenever you change scenes, the auto white balance would adjust according to each new scene. So one way that you can get around this is by just tweaking the white balance settings in your camera, whether it's fluorescent light, incandescent light, or if you manually set your white balance using the Kelvin feature. here. For instance, if you are outside, you can use 5600 Kelvin. If you're indoors, you can go between about 3200 Kelvin or 2800 Kelvin. The point is that if you have a very consistent white balance, the color tones in your images will be consistent all throughout. And I just want you to try it out and see if it makes a difference. I'm pretty sure it will. And that's it from me. If you are a church photographer and you want me to react to your images, feel free to email me your stuff at michaelarisphoto@gmail.com. If you want to see more of my videos, you can click right here. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.